I prepared a whole paper because I'm nervous, so I didn't want to memorize it.
Okay.
No, I'm just gonna say that this is the first of the talks we have prepared for you. And these talks will take place on Mondays and Wednesdays, and we will be announcing them on Yammer, UAL socials like Instagram, and via Facebook events because we wanted to make these public. But we also managed to organize some crits. These crits are not going to be public, so we have this kind of safe space, and they are on a sign-up basis with limited capacity, around 5 to 10 people. Yeah, just turn your mics and cameras off, and Lulu can take it from here.
This is Charlie Fox, and we've decided to invite him because I think he's a super young writer, and he's a really brilliant curator and artist overall. And I'm really into it, and I hope everyone else can. And so is Sabrina, who's here, just vanishing in the Black Lodge a little bit. But yeah, I just want to. I love the way he talks about stuff and how he can see beauty where the majority of people sometimes do not. And maybe, I mean, with this talk, you can help us reach for this level of, you know, you can help us see the beauty that you see, and with the monster.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That sounds.
Oh, and I forgot to add, there's going to be like a little Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat. But I suggest we just don't interrupt much from now on.
Fuck up. Yeah. And scene. You may.
Okay. Yeah. I'm really excited about the questions. That's always my favorite bit. So yeah, any questions are good questions. Just send whatever you want. Okay. My like little folder that I use to do these things is in really terrible order, but I think it's gonna be okay. We're gonna improvise around it. So I wanted to call this talk I Want Your Soul, because I think like I've done a few of these talks now, and they generally follow like a kind of weird pattern, and I didn't want to, and I know some of them are out there, they're like available for you to watch, so I didn't want to repeat myself explicitly. So this one is going to be like hopefully extremely confessional and autobiographical, and it's going to be more about kind of influences and things. I felt like, because I was talking to an art school, that I should talk maybe about like making work, or how work gets made, or how things get inside your head. So this idea of the relation that I'm trying to give you, like a little bit of my soul, like a kind of R&B balladeer, but you're also taking that from me when I give you these things. So they're like these weird physical incarnations of thoughts and fantasies and nightmares and influences and a whole Rubik's cube of garbage, and also the ways in which that relationship is kind of perverse and distorted. At the same time, I'm sure it's going to be like all the others and slowly crossfade into like a weird kind of greatest hits package of other stuff that I've done and I've made. But I thought it would be like a cool meta intro to start by talking about this poster of the caramel bunny that I made. I don't know like how well known she is as a mascot. I assumed that she'd been discontinued as the mascot and she'd gone wherever mascots go when they die. But it turns out she's still alive. She's, for anybody who doesn't know and isn't aware, she's like the kind of the mascot, or the kind of physical sponsor of the caramel bar, the Cadbury's caramel bar, which is just chocolate and caramel. And so she's like a weird sexy rabbit, like it's kind of Jessica Rabbit but taken fully into the realm of rabbit. It's very kind of, I guess now you would say it's like it must have been like a formative thing for lots of furries. Anyway, I was always really attracted to the caramel bunny without really knowing what was going on. And then I saw her in the supermarket the other day on some packaging for some like weird yogurts. And I was really surprised to see her, and I was quite bashful, actually. I think I might have started blushing right there in the dessert. aisle, dessert section, because normally I'm just walking around the supermarket like a zombie. So it was weird to see her, and also to think about having some kind of strange like having a relationship with this bizarre cartoon, which ultimately is a kind of it made me think about probably like Matthew Barney, or that time like Duchamp was dressed up as a fawn, and just how perverse, like, I guess these creatures are, these like manifestations, or these things that I would consider now to be kind of art experiences, or things that would be training for art in some way, or forerunners of thinking about art. But of course would never be part of any kind of art thing. Do you know what I mean? They would never be part of any kind of canonical thing, like, oh, the caramel bunny. And I think that was one of the first things that I really loved. I was really attracted to in all kinds of ways. Was this strange, this weird illustration of a rabbit. But I gave her some kind of demonic, flame-eyed things, and then I felt, because this talk exists like purely in a virtual way. Hang on, I've got a little. Is my connection going badly? Oh no, it's all right. Seems to have come back. Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to just carry on with that basically, and then I thought I would think about all the things that I liked when I was growing up, which also tended not to be art things. I don't think I had been to a gallery properly until I was in my well, not, I'd been to a gallery at all until I was like 15, 16. It wasn't really something that was going on, and I don't think it was actually something that it just didn't occur to me. I didn't know anybody who had been to one, I don't think. So a lot of the things that were formative to me were honestly just TV trash things. I should flag, because normally this question comes up at some point, that when I'm talking about these things from the past, I'm not necessarily invoking them in some kind of nostalgic way. It's not like a kind of I don't know, eBay of my mind or something, or it's not some kind of sizzle reel supercut of things that I remember from my childhood and I kind of lust after them. I think because of the way because things are kind of generally considered to be really terrible now, even though I think there are lots of things about being alive now that are tremendously exciting and transformative. And it's great to be alive at a time when there's so much new input and so much is changing and coming apart and things like that. At the same time, there's a kind of acceptance to the idea that if you do invoke material from the past, then you must be nostalgic for it and you lust after it. But I tried to be really explicit about that with the show that I did for Sadie Cole's My Head is a Haunted House, in terms of I've really felt like the word haunted was giving people a pretty clear indication that kind of these references or these allusions to things, they're haunted. They were like poltergeists. They were kind of demonic entities that I couldn't quite rid myself of. Often a lot of the things that show up in the work are things that, if they don't necessarily irritate me, they have some kind of they're things that I kind of can't expunge, things that I'm kind of always thinking about for reasons that aren't necessarily clear to me. And I would prefer to make, or I think it's better to make work out of things like that. I'm not necessarily someone who's approaching things with a very conscious program of what I want to do or what I want to achieve. I feel more like these things are kind of weird visitations and entities. And also at the same time, I like to get inside them and deform them, which is probably something to do with costume, I guess, which I think I'll talk about in a little bit. But also it's to do with, being like a Generation Y person or whatever the fuck, like growing up with the ability to distort or record media, living in a world of flattened time, living in a world of, I don't know, like Philip K. Dick style orthogonal time, where you could occupy any era you wanted, or they all exist kind of simultaneously. And so therefore, with your relationship to the past completely changed and it weirdly accessible and permeable, of course those things are going to be dredged up. And I think, I don't know, maybe this is too much of a kind of like psychoanalytic riff, but I think maybe, you know, this desire to distort material from the past has something to do with the fact that your ability to remember things in a subjective way has been destroyed. You used to have a memory, and then it kind of was immaterial and it would disappear, and you would do your best to remember it, and it would be a kind of mutant thing that would deform over time. But now everything remains exactly the same, and I think that maybe there's some kind of desire to destroy that. So other things that I liked, yeah, Family Guy was important to me, which I think is a really like gross thing to say, probably. Sure, it's something that hasn't yet been like recovered, but purely because I think the way that kind of Family Guy worked was that there was this anarchic center, or like there was a kind of absence of center, and instead there was just this kind of relentless proliferation of non sequiturs. Is very kind of formally outrageous. And I think in a way it still would be that instead you have kind of scenes, and then off those scenes you have these kind of things in brackets, which are really what the show is. And I love that kind of that sense of vertigo and I guess, yeah, like mutant possibility. I mean, if that doesn't sound like too much of a sort of fucking highfalutin, ridiculous thing to say, that I'm interested in the mutant possibilities of Family Guy. No, I mean, I think it stands up. Do you know what I mean? I think I think that it was a very, yeah, it was really the internet before we'd all got fully used to being submerged in the internet, in terms of just this being this relentless um cavalcade of illusion, distortion, a kind of weird repetition, parody. Parody is again something that's really interesting to me, in terms of what it teaches you about how the real thing works. The real form that you're parodying has formal tics and tropes that then can be occupied and distorted, and then meaning can be taken and thrown into these other kind of areas, which is, yeah, hot, persistent. Ice cream, big deal, especially things like this that don't even look like food. I've realized recently that food in general is a really big influence, and I think that it's not talked about enough in terms of being alive now, where I don't think this even looks like food. It's like some kind of strange galaxy of shit and garbage and kind of intergalactic trash all thrown together into a kind of ooze. It's like a horror movie in miniature. But I always think with things that I'm making about texture and flavor and heat and weight. And I guess they're all kind of food based things. I don't particularly like to cook, but I'm obsessed with food and the idea of food stylists and things like that. I made a thing recently that was like a demonic slush puppy that was absolutely disgusting. It was like marshmallows, bits of Haribo, chocolate, and also like this really black treacle that you can buy at the Nisa that like is a kind of, it's almost like a kind of antimatter. It's like that color that Anish Kapoor bought or something, but made into like a liquid form. It's very Cronenberg. It's extremely sexy. Right. Frasier. Not necessarily, I mean, Frasier in part because, I mean, there's a tastefulness about Frasier that I find kind of disgusting, but also just sitcom, the strange artifice of sitcom and comedy in general, because comedy, like horror, basically relies on giving you a kind of strange mirror of the world rather than the real world. You know, a kind of world of strange feedback and things misbehaving. Basically, there's something very appealing to me about the baseline idea of these parallel dimensions of comedy and horror, where things are supposed to basically go wrong. People are supposed to fall downstairs and get up and be fine, or get hit in the face with a mallet, or they kind of deliver jokes all the time, but nobody in their environment laughs. And in much the same way, horror functions on these kind of strange, surreal or unreal manifestations of reality, just in order to throw you through like a really extreme emotional state. The experience of being completely seduced into laughter, or powerless, helpless because of laughter, is similar to that experience of just blind terror. That manipulation is appealing to me, not because, I mean, obviously I think this is an unspoken thing too. I mean, obviously, as artists or as people who make stuff or whatever, of course you are manipulating things. You're manipulating a kind of mystery or constructing a kind of mystery, and like how much information is there and how much information you want to hide away. But also, I think a lot of the time, you want to, it's about how the work is received, or it's not necessarily about that, but that's the crucial thing, and what emotion, I guess, that you want to be the end of that work. The work isn't there just to justify its own little kind of private game, its own secret set of references or like historical hat doffing or whatever. Hopefully there's some kind of emotional thing happening, otherwise why would it be interesting, really? So I think things like that really hit you over the head with what they are, and are very explicitly kind of genre studies or whatever, or kind of things that are dependent upon being a certain genre. Horror, we have all these expectations of how things are going to be. We know the weather's going to be a certain way. We imagine there's going to be a certain kind of score. And you can very quickly create anarchy by just playing around with one or two of those little tricks. Although in my own work, I don't think I've made something that's explicitly horror. I've always tried to use, or I've always found myself using elements of it, dismembering them and trying to place them into different contexts. Have I made something that's all out horror? I'm not sure. This is the dog-headed man from the video for Defunk. Is it called Defunk by Daft Punk? Made by Spike Jones, who made Being John Malkovich and Her, an adaptation, and lots of really good music videos in the era in the 90s when the music video was like a really, it was really going insane, and they were creating these kind of huge big budget things. So this is a video where the track is really incidental. It's almost like a kind of weird, use a very 90s word, it's like a strange kind of deconstruction, or almost like it kind of trashes the idea of the music video, because you can hear the song, but it's as if it's playing from like a car window or something, and you just follow the travails of this dog-headed man called Charles, who's on crutches, and it's done in a very kind of realist way. It's really deadpan. Nobody remarks upon the fact that he's got a dog head. It doesn't seem to really be important to anybody. It seems to be just part of that reality, and that was really mesmerizing to me as a child, or when I was growing up. Basically, the idea of stripping away like a kind of fantastical machinery that we accept as part of a genre. Like, there was no magician hexing him. There was no Apelius Golden Ass style potion being ingested. There was no Beauty and the Beast enchanted rose. There was just the fact that he was just a regular schlub 90s slacker dude, like doing his best to make it around New York, but he happened to be a dog. And again, I think, yeah, that would relate to this notion of distortion. And I think music videos were the first thing where I really started to I was obsessed with puppetry and creatures and horror and things like that. Music videos were really the thing where I started to feel myself getting dangerously absorbed. Actually, I don't know if that's true. There we go. Puppets. These guys are from The Storyteller by Jim Henson, which is like a collection of fables, all illustrated with these beautiful creatures from the Jim Henson Creature Workshop. This was a thing that we had on VHS in my family home, and I remember looking at a medical advertisement in a copy of the British Medical Journal. I was about 6, because my mum was a doctor, so there were always copies of the British Medical Journal about, which is kind of important, I guess, or was formative. And there were all these pictures of devils, and somebody, maybe my mother, said, "Oh, we have this videotape of these devils." And I was really excited, obviously, of course. I was like a, weirdo. As like a preteen weirdo in suburbia, to see all these devils and these malign things. It's a really beautiful tale, and I think, like, in some way, the kind of meeting of the formal aspects of just pure mythology and the pure of like, this is a fantastical dimension where anything can happen, combined with kind of that documentary thing. They're kind of growing up as a person who watched a lot of Chris Morris, which is really kind of appears to be straightforward, appears to be normal. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of following a kind of idea of what televised reality is, or news coverage is, or things like that. The performances are very, very real, but of course what's coming out people's mouths is completely fantastical. Somewhere between ingesting all of that stuff and beginning to understand everything is a kind of trick, or everything is a vessel which can be distorted, perverted, mutated, transformed, like, and seeing things like that, seeing things like these devils, seeing things that were straight adaptations of mythology that pretended maybe to be in a medieval world, or just the kind of strange nowhere, no time zone of fable. Somewhere inside the kind of marriage of those two things in my like childhood brain, some kind of strange creature started to hatch, I think, and that became very important. This is the traumatic clown from The Simpsons. I think it's like almost like a Mike Kelly or something. It's really beautiful. Okay, so now we're kind of getting in this kind of weird Bildungsroman that I'm unfolding for you. We're getting closer to art, or things that could be described as art, I guess. But I think one of the things that I wanted to say, and one of the things that comes up a lot when I'm doing these talks, is I think that we have this like, or I think what you encounter a lot is this kind of idea of what influence is. There's nothing wrong with it, but you would kind of imagine that things were taken from purely from like an art historical context, and that's what everybody did, and that's how they made work, so that they were just you know, kind of, they'd gone through everything that was canonical or whatever. They looked at Robert Smithson, or they looked at, you know, Magritte or whoever, and from that they conjured up their work. Where they think that like we should talk about influence, or I don't want to be prescriptive and say that we should be doing this, but in my experience, you know what I mean, the things that are influential to me have nothing to do with art, I think. And if you look at art as the kind of, you know, game or whatever that it's been for the last 100 years, or having been this game which has had multiple incarnations across like recorded time, things that are not art are always things which are most appealing, that like art itself wants to ingest. I think like, so the Cremaster cycle is a really interesting example of this. I have absolutely no like problem with being really into Matthew Barney. I understand that like people if you go back to like art forums of yore, he's kind of being knocked, but I think it's mainly because the scale of the achievement is so big that he's going to have, you know, leeches on him all the time. But I think what really is the scale of what makes the scale of the achievement huge, or whatever, is just that incorporating so many things that were not art into art. Modeling, porn, horror movies, heavy metal, bees, creature prosthetics, all of these things within a kind of huge sprawling film epic odyssey. I mean, yeah, it was wild and it was magical, and I think that part of what made it so incredible was that it became something which, or it is something which accommodates all of these influences that don't seem to have any, or that would be kind of excluded and considered repulsive or something. A lot of the time when you talk to people about their work, they talk about it in terms of, yeah, like whatever, Duchamp or something, or whatever. But I would say, like, as wild as that stuff is, as sick as that stuff is, me personally, I find myself like, the things that I want to distort or the things that I want to play with tend to be, you know, all kinds of other things. I think my writing, or the writing that I do, was way more influenced by like the dialogue from films, and things like that, or like hip hop or records. Do you know what I mean? Not even things that are necessarily words or made out of words. Sampling, just like fucking distortion pedals, feedback, the script for Heathers, you know, just things in the world. I think that people's work becomes interesting when they start looking at things that are to do with their own experience of the world, trying to tell some kind of story about the reality that lives in their head, or like the world that lives in their head, and the kind of reality in inverted commas that's there outside, and the meeting between the two of them, a kind of autoerotic fucking circle jerk of art historical references isn't particularly interesting to me, or I don't think it's very interesting to anybody. It's always the things which are outside, which you have to bring in and chew up, which are interesting. And I suppose you could think about that as being a explicitly horror movie kind of analogy, which would be fine. Fireworks, I was really into fireworks, and especially fireworks safety videos were really they were always kind of, because fireworks have kind of gone off the shelf now. Growing up in the 90s, they were kind of everywhere, and they seemed like kind of demonic things that you could buy. It was almost like buying like a bag full of devils, and then you can unleash them at the sky. That was a really early aesthetic experience. The smell, the threat of violence, the threat of physical injury. I mean, it was like, you know, actionism, but it was happening in the sky. It was like watching somebody smash windows in the sky. It was like drugs, you know. And yeah, I still think of like a firework display as being kind of the ultimate. If I can, I would like to show you like a I would like to show like a video of a bunch of fireworks blowing up all at once. Okay, this is costume. So this is me. Hang on, I think I've just realized that, like, so are you only seeing this little portrait in the corner here? Hold up. Dun, 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 dun. Screen one. Fuckers. Oh, fuck it. I'm not going to be able to get this to work in a smooth way, am I? No. Okay. Here we go. So I'm going to carry on anyway. So yeah, costume. So that's me dressed as a werewolf on my birthday in the 90s. But yeah, costume, I guess, would be another thing that would be analogous here, of like saying a form or whatever, a thing that you're making, a sculpture, a piece of writing, whatever, is a kind of costume that you can put on. It's not something where there are kind of rules that you can obey. You know, you take it and you can style it and you can rip it up and you can set it on fire, or you can dip it in glitter or whatever. I was really interested, or for me personally, I was interested in kind of creating like a bunch of stuff that was sorry, somebody is texting me. I was interested in creating a bunch of stuff where there was no fixed persona there. It would just mutate from piece to piece, from one piece of work to the next. And it would always be about adopting the stance of something. So if I was going to write like a fable or create some kind of fairy tale, then I would try and ingest as much of that kind of tradition as I could, but then at the same time try to dismember it or hex it to throw it back out in some kind of other way. I really think of the writing stuff, especially, well, all of them. I mean, we're making like the Haunted House show, which I don't know how many people saw, but the show that was in London in 2019 and it was a kind of double album thing. I was interested in, like, because there was another show called Dracula's Wedding, which was running at Rodeo Gallery, which is also in London, and they kind of existed simultaneously as these kind of demonic twins, like the twins in The Shining. I wouldn't say that, like, I would never be interested in saying I am a curator, or I am a writer, or I am any kind of thing, really. I'm only really interested in adopting the body of these things in order to kind of mess around with them. So especially with the writing, I was really interested, or I really wanted to kind of think about it as a conceptual thing, not in some kind of like airless wank way, but like just kind of to think about things that aren't necessarily writing and how they can be incorporated into it, or like working with illustrators, or working with like my friend Emily Schubert, who makes prosthetics and works with like, just did like a shoot with Bella Hadid where she made her into like a kind of weird alien zombie creature, vampire creature. I was interested in putting, and then we made like a beauty column for Dazed Beauty when that launched, and we did like a modeling shoot, and I did kind of fake captions pretending to be this model called Veronica Schultz, who's a werewolf. That was in Dazed like last year, but again, like that has nothing to do with any kind of like, to me, like there's no kind of idea, like historical idea of the author that would allow that kind of thing, where okay, there is writing, but the kind of to go along with the illustration of that writing, yes, like we made photographs, like prosthetics were made, sets were built, and things like that. I was trying, or in my own like kind of perverse way, I wanted to expand the turf that was there. I wanted to manipulate my voice. I wanted to play around my voice. The ideas of intimacy and like knowledge that you have of writers, especially, or of somebody who makes art in general, I wanted to be like a masquerade. Hence this like 16th century depiction of a fox looking at a mask, which like I could probably get as a tattoo if I really worked hard. But like yeah, I was really interested in the idea of the role, costume. Like, yeah, I was a child addicted to costume, and dress up as Willy Wonka, dress up as a werewolf, or dress up as a mummy. Drag. As I got older, I was really interested in drag. Not for any kind of it wasn't personally fulfilling in the sense that I felt it enabled me to be closer to a certain idea of who I was inside, or like whatever. It was more that I was getting further away from just the generic person that I was, or the kind of standard everyday numb person that kind of the world asked you to be. It was about experimenting with who was there, what was there, and playing with my behavior. So certainly, like, yeah, with making all the work, I feel like I try and get closer to occupying a role, and try and get the work to tell me what it wants. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to have my own specific kind of programmatic notions that I'm going to kind of deploy through each piece or something. I want there to be a sense of the character that is motivating that. Obviously, if I'm a model and I'm a werewolf, I've got to then think about that persona. What would be the things that she was attracted to? I have to then almost be like the production designer of the brain for this person. What would be a formative memory for that person? What would be a product that she might endorse? What would be her favorite record? Things like that. And then those aesthetic choices start to proliferate, and they begat other things. They fucking begat them. They unleashed them. Yeah. I should also say that Ed Atkins is a really big fan of that show, The Storyteller. I remember him messaging me about that, and I always think that somebody should point out, yeah, his love of Jim Henson. Maybe that's not allowed anymore. Okay, this is Baldric the Alsatian. Baldric being an Alsatian from Blackadder. This was cool. This was like a sort of proto Family Guy experience, because this is where reality is kind of disintegrated. Blackadder's like in a dream, and he knows he's in a dream. And the idea of that kind of, I remember being about 6 or 7 watching this, the idea of that kind of meta double rug pull, consecutive rug pull, there being one layer of reality, and then that being revealed to be a sham, and then that in itself being revealed to be a sham, all happening within the TV, which is itself, of course, like a sham too, or at least an artificial reality, or a kind of dream. So that was tremendously compelling to me. Again, yeah, this kind of like, I guess like the fancy word to say about it would be self-referential, but I would just say something that was kind of pranking itself, was kind of taking off its own head and showing you inside, or showing you pieces of the costume, kind of waving to you in a costume whilst melting. The kind of delicious trippiness of that was hot to me. There is Coco, who was the model for Veronica the Werewolf. I think these are like some weird iPhone snaps that we had. that didn't make the final cut, but they were really good because they were kind of seedier. Well, not, I don't know, they weren't seedier, but they were more kind of in a they weren't as elegant. They seemed more like kind of grunged out, off the cuff, like more kind of Corinne Day style things. So fashion photography was like, so for that like particular project, as much as I was kind of drawing on my like deep knowledge of werewolf mythology and lycanthropy and all of those things, it was much more fun to put that in the context of, you know, a fashion magazine or whatever Dazed is, you know, a fashion magazine, a style magazine, a youth magazine, rather than kind of just returning to some kind of, I mean, I love Marina Warner, but I'm not interested necessarily in returning to what she's made. Or yeah, that's like a classical model of folklore. It's important that that be laid out. Me personally, I want to put that in the wrong place, put that somewhere where it doesn't belong. So the idea of something which would be kind of, yeah, considered a deformity, considered monstrosity, being offered up as an object of yeah, basically it's erotic, it's sexy. I mean, really, for this piece, like, I think me and Emily talked a lot about like wanting to make our own kind of pornographic thing, something that could be pornographic. You know, I don't know if werewolf porn's ever been made. It's probably out there, but certainly that was something that we were thinking about at the time. Again, because it would be something that like you had not encountered before. I mean, I think that as kind of ludicrous as that might sound as an ambition, I think secretly that's what everybody's after, isn't it? That you do want to make something that's not been touched, that you personally, when you see it, you feel like a sense of surprise. If you don't get that, then I don't know really what the I don't know really why you would want to continue, or why you would want to make anything. This is Homer as a clown in The Simpsons. I've started doing this thing. I've started to get more and more interested in characters. I'm not sure really why this happened. I think honestly I was just asked to do something which was hexed by COVID or cancelled because of COVID. I was asked to perform at this thing in Zurich, and I really wanted to be a kind of depressive clown. So I've made a lot of work. Some of it will be coming out soon in the persona of this depressive, heavily medicated, opiated clown, like a classic Pierrot clown, who's the kind of lovesick clown from the Commedia dell'arte, who shows up in lots of things. He's had lots of manifestations. He's a kind of, yeah, generic kind of entity, manifestation of sorrow. He's been a villain in Batman that knows kung fu. He's been David Bowie's persona in the video for Ashes to Ashes. He's in stuff by Robert Wilson. He's in things by Kenneth Anger. There's a whole kind of because he's an embodiment of melancholia, a certain kind of idea of the artist's plight or something. And I wanted to be him, return to him or something. And so I started making these kind of strange audio pieces where I would distort my voice as if I'd kind of drunk way too much cough syrup, like chop and screw my own voice, and then lay it in this kind of strange ambient fog, this kind of as if it was kind of a voice coming to you from the inside of some kind of weird dry ice dream thing. I think I ended up one of those things, like those kind of the nod monologues, these kind of nocturnal monologues, is in this thing that I did for the Safdies, like a radio thing for the Alara. It's like a mixtape basically. And he's generated all kinds of work, and then it's led to other creatures have kind of come out of from him as well. But I think I was really interested in the idea of self-portraiture but distorting it. So what is a self-portrait when you're in a persona? Or maybe that's more faithful. That's, you know, the idea of authenticity obviously is a hologram in itself. But yeah, maybe that was by allowing that kind of strange entity from my mind, some demon from my unconscious, to cavort around and talk about his Amazon habit or something. I was getting closer to the raw material of my brain. Okay. Tricky, drag, Delia. Yeah, this is cooking shows. I think this is just as an aside, really, but I think watching cooking shows, it's very, very close to being in some kind of medicated world. The ambience is very tranquilizing, but also it's a good place to learn about art, you know, how to make things that are tasty, how to deal with tradition, how to put your own flavor into things. I also like the way that it's a completely artificial environment. It's kind of offering up some notion of home, but it's completely fake. Or it's bizarre. It's full of dead foliage and strange lights, and it's colored weirdly. But I remember watching a lot of Delia Smith and being really fascinated by the fact that she was obviously some kind of witch. I like to imagine that she was the witch from Hansel and Gretel, and that she was showing you other things that she liked to eat when there were no children around. Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. This still looks incredibly it looks like something like Alex de Corte would make. It's because of this like strange primary color block. Almost could be green screen, but yeah, I think it was a big show, big deal. Prosthetics, yeah. The werewolf, the sexy werewolf from Coppola's Dracula. I remember sneaking downstairs to watch this. Melancholy Infinite Sadness. Oh, that's cool. That's a GIF. Is that GIF? It's a GIF, yeah, of course. It's a GIF of a wrestling match, Hell in the Cell, where there are these two, Mankind and the Undertaker, wrestling on this strange kind of industrial sculpture, this like weird Katie Nolan thing. This was like an incredibly kind of, this was like a kind of strange folk myth in my childhood, the existence of this video or this match, which happened in Pittsburgh in the 90s. Wrestling, of course, is like gross in lots of ways. It's very kind of pornographic. It's a kind of parody of masculinity exists, right? In wrestling. It's so parodic. I guess this kind of, yeah, this links in with the Cremaster cycle in some weird ways. It's so parodic that it actually kind of ends up lurching into a kind of femininity, because all of these men are, you know, injecting themselves with growth hormones and steroids that actually inhibit their masculinity and cause them to grow breasts and have these weird imbalances of testosterone, or cause the women who are in it, who participate in it, to grow beards or whatever. I mean, it's a kind of strange, it seems like it's a kind of debauched thing from like another time, you know. It's from like some kind of, it's like some kind of strange mix of like Fellini's Rome and like science fiction cohabiting at the same time. And it also it fed like a kind of like a childhood appetite for violence and aggression that you also get in Home Alone, which is like a kind of horror movie about a demonic house, a house that can kill you. And kind of superhero lore and things like that through these fantastical characters. I guess the guy that we're watching being power slammed over and over again is most known for how he expanded the vocabulary of wrestling personas. Mick Foley, Mankind. He had sort of 3 or 4 roles that he would play. He was kind of taking this kind of straight Jungian approach in these kind of stadiums full of jocks, pseudo jocks, kind of Miller Lite guzzling, yeah, working people, but giving them this kind of insane, strange theater where he was a kind of horror movie character, or a surfer, or a kind of weird outlaw cowboy thing called Cactus Jack. Then there would be blood, then there would be explosions and chairs used as weaponry, and it was really like sinister. It was really taken as like a horrific thing in the 90s, but also yeah, to me it kind of relates to ideas of performance art, actionism, blood, Joseph Boys, things things like that. I think could easily be kind of offered up as parallel things to wrestling. And of course, again, yeah, something like the GIF, just as a form, not to get too fucking, I don't know, accelerationist or whatever. I'm not even really sure what that is, but I imagine they would lust after the GIF as a form. But like it's so insane to just watch a kind of continuous loop of something. And I think, I can't remember if there are any stills from it here, but certainly I think really like Pulp Fiction was another thing that I remember being a kind of a tape that was lasted after, for obvious reasons. And we can all talk about like kind of the bro-ish aspect of that, or like the guy that you meet like who immediately says that's his favorite film. Also, it's like, yeah, it's a movie about other movies, but I think in a strange kind of way, like Pulp Fiction was preempted the internet in a formal way, just because it offers this historical, this like explicitly historicized, whatever, postmodern landscape, but as flattened time. All of these things just exist on kind of one flat tableau, like a weird vanitas painting or something. But over there's the 50s, here's the 60s, here's the 70s, and they all add up to a kind of non-time in the way that the internet does. So I think like with allusions and references, because people always talk to me about being the fucking reference person, I was always interested in deranging them or denuding them from like their original context and putting them up against other things. Then they're no longer what they were. And I guess sampling, of course, relates to that. And like also at the same time, they were strangely out of time, or by being thrown together, they would propose some kind of other Frankenstein. Right. I'm going to whirl through some of these because I feel like I'm getting extremely seduced by little rabbit holes along the way, and I still want this to have some kind of formal curve. So I'll just say quickly, as this gets more kind of digressive and freeform, I'll just say quickly that, and also like I would say that your questions are really the thing that I'm most interested in, or more interested in than necessarily exhuming these corpses from my past. But this is a leg, or two legs, from, it's somebody with a condition called Henoch-Schönlein purpura, where your leg is kind of covered in these strange purple splotches. It's like Prince's favorite disease. And somebody I knew growing up had this briefly. It's like a kind of incapacitating leg complaint. It's not like a nice thing to have. For some reason, it kind of leaches into your muscles. It affects your body, like your ability to walk and things like that, but you can recover from it. But growing up as the object of a lot of medical scrutiny, but also being around a lot of medical stuff, because my mother was a doctor anyway, so the home being kind of populated with or kind of surrounded with copies of the BMJ, which contained quite extreme and unsettling imagery, which again was deadpan. These things are kind of stills like that are all over these magazines, everywhere, and they're not offered up as any kind of object of grotesquerie or anything sinister. These are just things that can happen to your body. I think that would affect or lead to my attraction maybe to more extreme kinds of imagery, and also wanting to manipulate the context around it, or maybe seeing something inside it which is not necessarily the straightforward immediate reflex response of this is grotesque, this is horrifying, but wanting to kind of almost slow things down is the best way I could put it. To kind of slow things down or submerge them in some kind of eerie fluorescent water where they no longer meant what you might imagine they mean, or what you think they're supposed to mean. I mean, who's telling you, this is how you should relate to your body? A good body is a clean body. A good body is a body that you can't see what's going on inside. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think that these things, all of these things that you make are kind of, or for me as well, I mean, the body is always there as a theme, right? It's always there as a way of telling a story. If something goes wrong with the body, if the body mutates, this is like throwing you into a different realm of storytelling. Possibilities open up there. The body is like more than it was. So these things that may be interpreted as a deformity, I would see instead as parodies of an idea of normality, triumphs against like an idea of normality, an ordeal of normality. And also, like propositions for some kind of other world, some kind of parallel world, where things behave differently. or you can be a different kind of creature. I'm just going to think a little bit more about that for a second. Have a little shuffle through. Dum, 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 dum. I mean, yeah, so that stuff was around a lot when I was growing up. But there was also, my dad's a pearl dealer. My dad trades pearls. So in the house, there was always footage, or my mum would be kind of, she would be flicking through medical magazines, looking at medical magazines. They would be around on the kitchen table while she was having breakfast, and they would contain people with burn injuries, or people with post-operative scars from surgery, or people who, remember there was a whole thing of the teeth of people who would eat and sleepwalk at the same time, which I was really into looking at. And then pearls. So in some kind of strange way, I guess you could say, if you wanted to play like an explicitly psychoanalytic game or something, like I'm doing now, like I would say, of course, there's a kind of strange idea of beauty is being kindled there, a kind of proximity of commodities. And I think more and more that I'm just really interested in branding in the way that you offer up a concept and kind of manipulate the emotion that it's meant to make you feel, that you're trying to kindle some kind of desire, and you're going to say these shoes are the greatest shoes, or whatever, these are the shoes that make you attractive, that you're really kind of offering up something as magic and a kind of an object or a thing that seems to, that kind of comes into the real world and has the explicit purpose of seducing you, or has this other mythology, has these textures and these details kind of encoded within it, that I think, yeah, is really like a branding thing. All right. Yeah. And yeah, you're just trying to stylize something, I guess, to the point where it becomes plausible. Hang on, I don't know what that means, but let's carry on. Right. I will return to this idea of branding. Titanic is a big deal, but my dad sold pearls, and I think the juxtaposition of those two things, of a kind of Cronenberg physicality and a kind of lush eroticism, a kind of lush, luxurious commodity or something, really started fires in my brain. Two kind of weird ideas of beauty got fused. They got into the, like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, and it definitely kindled something, or it unleashed something. Titanic is really interesting to me. I remember watching this a lot as a child. I think because it's hard, because it's a kind of soldering together of things. It's a kind of romance and also a kind of horrific disaster, and it takes place in a kind of fixed environment. I think the Haunted House show is really influenced by this, because it's almost like the hotel in The Shining or something. It's just an environment where things go wrong. Suddenly ice is careening down a corridor, or there's a huge gash in the wall. But before that, you have a romance and kind of the strange tidal pattern, or the water that carries you through that narrative is like prone to these radical wild shifts in tone, but somehow it's sustained. There's those like lulling ambient flutes and something. There's the idea of the romance, there's the idea of these two beautiful creatures at the heart of it, which enable everything around it to transform wildly and be kind of in a state of never-ending chaos and disaster. But you don't notice that happening, and I think that's an interesting way of thinking about storytelling, more as texture. I think certainly, yeah, with my writing, I was always more interested in the just how this thing is going to feel, what kind of strange lurches and paths is it going to go down, who is it who's talking to you, what kind of intimacy do they have with you, rather than thinking about kind of set formal prepositions or whatever, or an argument. I just wanted to kind of submerge myself in the mood of something, or the ghost of the subject. Do you know what I mean? Whatever kind of the way in which the idea of a person, the idea of Kurt Cobain or something, is encoded within his smashed guitar. What does that tell you about him as a person? How could that be a kind of a biography of him in some way? I think stuff like that was always much more interesting to me than dealing with some kind of explicitly historical model or some kind of idea of storytelling that starts at point A and then moves to point 2. I was much more interested in having these objects kind of suspended in dry ice and kind of digressing around them or confabulating around them. That is the digital simulation of a fox from Antichrist. Also Tails from Sonic. Roller coasters, video games. I think, yeah, environment simulation. There's a game with the haunted house where there was a kind of the floor from the Red Room was there, from David Lynch's Twin Peaks. But the lighting was purple and green, and so it kind of destabilized that reference or whatever, or that illusion or homage. Like you were suddenly in a world where that was being invoked, but another kind of pressure or another thing was kind of sucking on it. It's like leeching on it. And I think the way that I was thinking about that show and curating that show was more as a kind of video game, as just a world that you could walk around where there were these strange objects that you could observe. I was never a gamer, really. I watched a lot of people play video games because I sucked at them, but I think that was a really important influence, because it was about a different kind of storytelling, I think, and a way of experiencing something that was just about walking around, interacting with it, these strange objects that come up to you and tell you a riddle or make you feel good inside or are potentially dangerous. Certainly with like a lot of the objects in the haunted house and Dracula's wedding, I was thinking about them more in terms of those kind of things as kind of weird throbbing entities in this strange elusive dreamscape landscape. So that's Tails the fox, who's the hyperactive fox from Sonic, which is like, I remember playing that game a lot and identifying heavily with this hyperactive fox for obvious reasons. Raccoons, big influence, feasting on trash. Here are some raccoons making out on an Instagram story that I'd made that came up as a reel, or whatever. Yeah, and I put the song, the One O Tricks But Never song that me and Emily made the video for, over the top, over these raccoons making out. This the set from Pee Wee Herman, Pee Wee's Playhouse, maybe Gary Panther. Which again is a kind of deranged funhouse environment, a kind of insane environment, where things can go wrong. I mean, things can change suddenly, or the wall can be eaten, or somebody's going to come round. I would like to, like, in some way, be able to sustain a similar kind of state. Like, I would like the work that I make to be akin to a theme park, or to be akin to some kind of deranged children's TV show where stuff never stops coming in through the window, where there can be sudden hyperactive turns and changes in mood or changes in texture, where things can kind of fall out of the sky and arrive, and whatever the kind of governing hand of this thing is seems to be at the mercy of the creatures that inhabit that world, rather than it being strictly real or unreal. More raccoons. Tom York being blonde is important to me because he had a lazy eye, like me. Nil by mouth. South London classic. This was again, I think this was about the kind of deadpan thing. As like growing up, I really liked, like when I was like in my early teens, I really liked, I don't think I was really even into horror necessarily. I had been into horror like as a child, massively, because I grew up feeling very strange about my body. I think that's like probably like the kind of generic thing that kind of circles around me as a kind of origin myth is some kind of perverse body and this obsession with horror. But I was never like a gore hound person. I was never like somebody who was really into like Chucky or something. I was really interested in, empathized with these werewolves or vampires or something, these people who could not participate in the ordinary world, but at the same time had kind of taken the fact that they were physically kind of damaged in some way and turned that into kind of a force of celebration or just a force of chaos in the world. I think that was really it for me. The idea that you could take these negative things, feed off them, and then translate them into something much darker. Or not much darker, but just as a force in the world, a force of anarchy. I got an email from some random fucking guy. Dalmatian fur, Winona in heathers, wolves. Spent a lot of time pretending to be a wolf. Rappers. Okay, so I think this is DJ Screw looking at some like purple drank or getting some purple drank ready in the back of a sick car in Houston. And I think what I wanted to say about this, and I may have already said it before, but I think the point where my work started to get interesting was when I started to think about things in kind of like a rapper, if that makes any sense. In terms of, I always liked, or what I always loved about hip hop was a whole bunch of things. But what I liked about, or how I felt I could relate to it, was that I wasn't interested in doing writing or making work that looked like other work or looked like or behaved normally, right? And I love the idea that like a rapper can just burst into a track and come in and kind of graffiti it, like piss all over it, bite it, chew it, and it comes down to just aspects of personal style, and it's like their style, their flow or whatever, and the kind of character that they've created to kind of live inside. And then also the textural things about hip hop, that they would just sample like somebody smashing a window or some random thing that was going on in the background of the TV, or like a toy commercial or something. I was interested in that kind of, again, a kind of weird sculpture of chaos that was on fire, that kind of whooshed through you, rather than being like, okay, I'm really interested in Roland Barthes or something, and I'm gonna now offer this up as a kind of dry expert thing. I wanted to create some kind of explosive entity that was built out of lots of things that I loved. Outcast, again, the kind of straight Jungian split, I guess, of the Outcast double album was explicitly invoked with the Haunted House show and Dracula's Wedding, but there being something so amazing and kind of shocking to people about Andre 3000 kind of being this kind of African American dandy, kind of wearing like these kind of insane fuchsia, like I think there was a really amazing picture of him strutting through like dry ice in these kind of fuchsia trousers that they almost look like props from the Creepmaster cycle or something. They look like kind of giant flowers, lurid flowers, and the kind of queer aspect of that and things like that, of like that in maybe in hip hop, like there's a kind of there's a very heavily circumscribed idea of how you behave, and this is how you be a man. But of course, when there's that much of a straitjacket, the ability to cause trouble is so much more intensified. The ability to, when you rip out of it, you really create a surprise. So he was always like a big hero to me, because he was taking this idea of being a boy or being a man and then doing a kind of strange demonic twirl, much like Prince. But and of course, and also just the sonics. I mean, I think that's really like texturally, sonically aspects of hip hop. The kind of funhouse aspect of listening to like an Outkast track where there would just be like some kind of weird explosion or like a toy piano or something. That was always way more what I would think about in terms of the mood of the work that I was making or what I was making. And I guess again, almost like a sonic representation of fucking Pulp Fiction or something, like that it was explicitly, it was a kind of a world of flattened time. It was a soundscape of kind of time with stuff floating through it that had been mutated or fit to a certain purpose. Monsters Inc., probably like the conversion point of all of this stuff in some way, that Monsters Inc. is kind of shot like Larry Clark's Kids, but all of the occupants of it are digital renderings of monsters, but they inhabit like a world where that's perfectly normal. I was always interested in that rug sweep. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about like the Beckett thing that he said about I'm interested in I use stuff from Christianity because it's the mythology that I'm most familiar with. It's not necessarily a question of my own belief, or it's really not a question of my own belief. It's just a mythology that I'm familiar with. I was always very, very drawn to horror for all kinds of personal and physical and aesthetic reasons and empathetic reasons, but at the same time I never wanted to make something that was just like I was just like a scary clown like jumping out at you with a knife. I wanted to take that genre and mess around with it so that it could be romantic, so that it could be dreamy, so that it could be strange. Animals selling you food, very important influence to me, obviously. For me, obviously. And yeah, Jim Carrey, comedians, entertainers, things like that. You know, people who get inside the dressing up box and allow themselves to undergo all kinds of changes, subject their bodies to kind of weird things in order to entertain you. I mean, I really like to think of what I'm doing as entertainment, as something entertaining. So yeah. Right. Okay. I think I might stop there and we can, yeah, do some questions or something.
Okay, does anyone go first? There's one question in the chat, by the way.
Okay, cool. What could you see? I'm curious. I just want to ask before we get going. Could you see all right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it was
Good. Okay, because I couldn't tell. You know, it's like a strange thing because you're just talking into this like
void.
talking into the void, talking into the abyss. So I'm glad that everybody was there.